Welcome to Flowcast. I'm Sister Beth Murphy. Artificial intelligence is ushering in the fourth, or some people say the fifth, industrial revolution, and it is coming fast. Predictions suggest as much as a 45% loss of jobs could occur in the next 5 to 10 years. This holds many challenges for people of faith as we learn to navigate this rapidly evolving technological rupture. So, are you ready? Our guest today is Ray Schroeder, an internationally sought after thinker about AI and its implications for higher education. And I am blessed to say, a longtime friend and, shall I say, co-conspirator. Ray will help us ground our thinking about AI and come to terms with our responsibilities as people of faith in this new environment. So welcome, Ray.
Thank you so much, Sister Beth. It's wonderful to join you once again today. And yet, you look over the decades and the topics in technology enhanced communication and education and society have changed day by day, week by week.
It's so fast, it seems, and much faster in the last 30 years of our lives than perhaps any other time in human history, right?
Absolutely. It's accelerating. And we're moving really in so many aspects. It's really kind of an exponential curve. And those curves go almost vertical at the end. And that's where we seem to be approaching in the development of this technology. It also is, this technology, when we talk about artificial intelligence, starting out of machine learning and refined over time and neural networks, has moved so quickly, much faster than the advent of the internet, for example, or the advent of many other of our recent technologies. So the time is compressed, and that's why it's so important to have these discussions today, because the impact is right around the corner.
Mm. So let's get started with that, Ray. And I guess I first want to ask, how should we understand what AI is? Can you give our listeners just the simplest explanation?
Yeah, well, I think we begin. It is a, an artifact of computers. It is largely the artifact of computer programming. However, it takes what we're accustomed to farther down the technological line. So we think of it as we would use the term algorithm as we would a computer program. And that program that is governed by algorithms determines what can be done and how effectively it can be done. So, certainly, this comes out of computers. Much of it is programmed in a rather simple Python computer language. It runs on neural networks in most cases. And um, and as I say, it's moving very quickly. What we see a big bump coming up in the next 5 years is quantum computing. And that's using hardware with capabilities that we've not used before. So there's further behind. It's like a train, and we see a great big package coming along the way, which will give much more power to this. But I think we need to focus first on what we see today with the technologies that are being released as they are.
Mm-hmm. So, what is the AI that we're seeing right now that's already impacting our lives, right?
Right. Well,
Um,
let me add one more factor, and that is that there are what we call the frontier models, and there are many more, but there are three key providers that have invested tens and actually hundreds of billions of dollars, collectively $1 trillion into this project. So it has a huge competitive edge. And as these three, which include Google with Gemini and OpenAI that provides us with Chat GPT versions, and the third is Anthropic with Sonnet and Claude. So they all have product names as well as the corporate names. But those three push one another incredibly. They're pushing, 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 and the competition has one-upsmanship every day. And so we see new releases about every 2 weeks. And, of a wholly revamped system or a largely enhanced new system. So it's a whirlwind of a ride.
So let me ask this question, kind of out of my ignorance. We talked about this once before. You mentioned we recently did a public presentation together, and you mentioned that there's two sorts of AI: generative and agentic. So when
Yes.
you talk about these companies that are pushing these new models, are they are generative AI and agentic AI like parallel train tracks, or has agentic AI just completely taken over?
Yeah, agentic AI has largely taken over these events, and the difference is, day to day, many of us have been on bots, if you will, or apps where you type in a prompt, and the prompt, many people simply type in a question like they would in Google search, but uh, you could put much, much more into this prompt to pinpoint just what you're looking for than you can in a Google prompt. But
Mhm.
nevertheless, um, that's really uh, kind of passe. And the second step that's really accelerating now is agentic, as in agent. So the key word this is built upon is agent. And so you can give a set of instructions and AI can piece them all together. You can say, well, I want to go to Patagonia. What's the cost? How do I go? And it will go through and make those reservations for me. And so it has capabilities across the board to be your agent. If you give it your passwords, if you give it your credit cards and phone numbers, and give it access to your calendar, it can do many of the things that a personal assistant could do. And that includes making a phone call and using your voice, or hopefully its own voice. So it's not totally impersonating you, but nevertheless, and ask for and make commitments on your behalf.
Okay, so Ray, I have to ask you a question. Do you use agentic AI in that way? Have they planned your trip to Patagonia for you, or has it?
No, no, there's a budgetary issue there personally for me,
You mean you
but
can't afford to go to
but
Patagonia?
yeah, right. However, exactly. But but I do have it take multiple instructions, and so one of the things I think I mentioned to you is that I have that my brother and another close friend have a terrible disease, glioblastoma, which is a cancer of the brain, and I send these two, one's in Boston and the other's in Seattle, with targeted information as to what are the recent developments, what what's coming next, what's available to you now in the Seattle area, in the Boston area. And it does that for me. And I have kind of hands-on. I like to check it before it goes, but I could have it automatically emailed to them. And I do these every Monday and Tuesday. And that kind of leads me to another brief digression, which you've heard certainly before, and it is that I don't trust a single AI app. Rather, I use all three that I've mentioned, and I pose the same prompt to each of them. Then I compare them, and if there's one that's wildly out of line, then I dig into that. I ask the other two, well, what about this? You see, and gosh, Gemini told me this, but ChatGPT, you didn't. What do you know about this? And Anthropic or Claude, what do you know about this? And so I kind of have a cluster of three of them, the three largest and most, I will say, the most reliable and most studied versions, and compare them one to another before I send that report out.
Mhm.
Because you can imagine in this circumstance, these families they're up to their eyeballs in challenges because the life expectancy is normally 12 months or so.
Mhm. So that's a really positive and wonderful use of AI. You in that case are using it to promote human dignity and to give your brother and your friend a shot at finding um, the best treatments possible for their disease.
Yes,
So
and quality of life.
and
Yes,
quality of life, and so that's really an important way to use it. That is positive, but it can also be used for ill. So how do
yes.
we as Christians sort all of that out? How do we pay attention to the concerns of AI? And for me, one of the first areas that I became aware of that was alarming to me was ecological. So we know that these aren't just how shall I say, the communication is not floating in the air, and we're not using, like Harry Potter, owls to share this information. We talk about the cloud, but that is a huge network of data centers that are built all over the world that take a tremendous amount of, first of all, material resources, electricity, water, land. And those data centers they're not the cleanest power producing plants on the face of the earth. There's a lot of problems with them. They create ecological challenges. So that's for me one of the very first ethical concerns about AI is the amount of resources that are being used and concentrated for the power of really just these few companies. You said three. I've heard it said that there are like basically five people who own all of the AI tools that exist in the world. So, how do we deal with those kinds of questions?
Well, those are great questions. Yeah, and first, certainly there are many involved, and worldwide, um, there are countries like China that have developed open versions of AI and closed versions and hidden versions, at least allegedly, and others. So there are many, many versions out there beyond those three, but they're the three largest and they're based here. I would say, uh, as we look at this topic, there's change coming too. And so, one of the first things that can be done is that, and at least one, and maybe all three are looking at providing solar to homes, personal homes, and then buying among the, I have a solar system in my home, and so a smaller one. But what it does is when I'm not fully using it for the dryer and the air conditioner and whatnot, it it puts electricity back on the grid,
Mm-hmm.
and they're taking and buying up that extra energy that's generated home by home by home. The the homeowner gets paid from the electric company for that, but they in turn charge commercial users such as the data centers for AI. So that's one way to disperse it. But the real solution, I think, comes in, and I'm not a total fan of Elon Musk, but he's led the charge in proposing and building, in the process of building large data centers that will be satellite supported. Because one of the problems with converting or creating the electricity necessary for the data center is to run turbine engines, usually steam driven, as well as the chips themselves heat up, so they have to be cooled, either air cooled, water cooled, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the theory is, and I've not seen a successful example, although I've seen images of it work in progress, would be to put it up in satellites and to have data centers up in satellites where in space, of course, there is no atmosphere, but it's quite cold, very cold. Using solar panels to gather energy from the sun and then cooling the chips as well as whatever it may be. It's a closed water system. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one way is to move it there.
Sure.
Another is that finally, I remember I was a child. So, 65 years ago, and I was what, 11? So that at that time, we toured a nuclear facility and they were talking fusion, which is right now we use nuclear fission, where where we split atoms and we get radioactivity. With fusion, we combine atoms, and the residue that we get from it is not radioactive. So the sun is the ultimate fusion source out there. It's much more powerful than fission. But so that's one way to go is to use fusion generators or fuel generators rather than fission. So that too is coming. So
Mm.
there are things that I think are within 5 years that will bring down the environmental impact and of these. And so then it's all stored up literally beyond the clouds, up in space, and uh, and then we just just as we do now, we download and upload our
Mm-hmm.
information.
So that is one possible answer to the ecological question, but there
Yeah,
are other ethical concerns too. And
sure.
another one that is really coming very quickly down the tracks for us is labor disruption.
Yes.
Um, we've spoken before. I have a niece who is a project manager for Starbucks out in Seattle, and she told me recently that she has just survived two layoffs, but she's not sure that she will survive a third one. And all of those Starbucks employees are being replaced by agentic AI tools that can do things much more efficiently. So that's the question about labor disruption touches directly on the value of our human labor, which for Catholics has always been, at least for the last 125 years, been seen as a real mark of our human dignity, our creativity, and our energy, all of that, which we have within us. We share through our labor to bring our gifts to the world and to make the world a better place ultimately. So, how do we deal with things like labor disruption that is going to really cause us to question what is our value as human beings?
Yes, and I have a good colleague over at the University of Illinois Urbana. Well, actually, he too is emeritus, Lanny Arvan, who just wrote an essay on the very topic that touches on this, and it is: do we need employment in order to gauge or generate income? And as an economist, he's still looking at that topic. Um, I think most come up with a solution whereby um, the government, in each government, has to fund a minimal income. And Peter Diamandis, I don't know if you've heard of him. He's written a book, Abundance, but and he's a leader. He created the X Prize, and beyond that, uh, he projects uh, the opportunity to create a high income, a universal high income. So there's the first approach being a universal minimal income. When we hear about that from politicians, it almost has to be in the neighborhood of $3,000 a month, and that's too low.
That's the basic income that the
That's the
governments are
basic,
talking about.
right?
Okay.
And that still, that's a very uncomfortable. Maybe if it's distributed, I mean, it's distributed per person, but probably not for children, and who knows what, how taxes and governments work. But maybe there are supplements. That all would have to be worked out. And yet, we've lit the fuse on 18 months, I'd say. Certainly within a year and a half, this will be very clear to us. We will have lost 10 or 20% of our labor force.
In the
And
next 18 months is what you're telling
yes,
me. Wow.
absolutely. Because that's how we're going to get to a 40% drop within a decade. And it's going to accelerate. It will build upon itself. Now, we've seen it first in the tech fields where there's layoff after layoff after layoff. We also have seen it in retail. And so, my mission is ringing the bell in higher education for, for this shakeout that is coming to higher ed and somewhat to secondary ed. Less so or later, I think, to elementary ed, because we're going to have a difficulty seeing robots embracing our 8-year-olds, you see, and trying to give them comfort. So I think that we're going to see this moving down the grade levels, but it's all coming. And it's kind of like we've started this in motion, and now I can't see anything that will stop it. And why is that? That's because this is so economically efficient. You know, when we hire humans appropriately, we have what we in higher ed call indirect costs, which are insurance and other vacation and sick leave and benefits. But
Office space for them to live in?
yes, right,
Mhm.
all of that, where the bots work 23 to 24 hours. Now, that extra hour that they're not working, they may be charging, but they may be able to work while they're charging too. So, and that bots are coming out that can do effective work, that have um, very high levels of knowledge, access to the internet, of course, and can respond um, in a way that is very difficult to differentiate from a professional. They're coming out at about 85 to $100,000. Well, you see, but and their life is perhaps 5 years. So per year you're paying 20,000 plus interest or something like that.
Much
And,
cheaper than an employee,
and
isn't
none
it?
of the indirect costs. And sure, something can happen to them. They can get a short circuit. But at this point, it seems less likely than, an illness that takes a human out of the office for a week or a month.
Let me ask you a question. Will these AI bots, the high level robots, and I think recently I was watching the news and I saw the first lady walk into some room at the White House with a a very humanoid looking robot,
Hmm.
which was a little scary to me. And the story was very brief, so I'm not exactly sure what was going on there. But yeah, they can move like human beings, and it's just a short time before they can replace us in many of our tasks. But um, what does this do to our humanity? How do we understand what it means to be a human in a situation like this? And who are the people who are going to suffer the most from the development of these tools? They're
So
already causing. We've talked about this before, but I'm aware that in order to train the computers, they need to have a large database of information from which to draw. And they're called large language models because they're very textual. But if you want one of these AI tools to be able to describe a photograph, let's say, then right now, as of right now, human beings have to describe those photos in words in order for them to be useful to the AI tools. And there's a whole new sort of exploitation of human labor that is going into getting those photos interpreted into words. There are people, they're called crowd workers. Most of them are in Africa. There are some here in the United States. And they're employed by third party companies that the big AI companies hire in order to get the images described. And this is causing a lot of exploitation because they're not paid very much, number one. And the second thing is psychological trauma, because very often the images that they're called on to describe are violent. And they're looking at hundreds, if not thousands, of these in the course of a day. And it's causing a lot of challenges in PTSD, besides not treating these folks like they're human beings, you know? So we talk about AI and we think it's all machine, but it isn't. There are human beings behind the development of these tools that are suffering as a consequence. So how do we deal with that reality again as Christians, you know?
I think we certainly have to point to it. I think, though, on our side will be the general public when, as these are exposed through whatever news media, that people will respond to it. And then Anthropic will say, we do not use those workers. We use college graduates. And yes, we don't pay them more than $60,000 right out of college, but we do that. And it raises their product, you know, 3% or 2%. And then that forces the competitors to respond to that in some way. So I think it's important for us to raise those examples. I think this is not a static field. So if they're given wrong information, or if the public at large responds to the impact on those workers, that we will see a difference. Now, one of the things where we are now, these were figures released by ChatGPT just a week ago. Now, they have all kinds of um, examples where they test and they test the output of AI against humans, and they have panels who are professionals. In this case, with PhDs with a minimum of 15 years experience, and they did this in 44 fields and asked um, questions that were determined by representatives of the field as being appropriate or representative. That is the kind of question you would ask an accountant, you would ask a lawyer, you would ask these people. And they found that on average, ChatGPT was in the 87th percentile in answering those questions. given to human professionals among 44 professions. And these were not just computer science, they were more, business and whatnot. Now, that's not comprehensive, but that shows the kind of target they're moving toward because they want to be able to assure corporations that they can, in fact, um, replace their human workforce. And there are some companies that have laid off 1,000 or more than 1,000 people in that front line, customer service, and who knows, all kinds of positions. So, what, and then if it costs you only 20% of what it cost you otherwise for those workers, you're going to see businesses saying, if we don't do this, we're not going to be able to make a profit. We're not going to be able to keep up at scale.
But I have a question, Ray. Should that be the goal? Should replacing human workers be the goal?
No,
How will
no, it
people
shouldn't
live?
be. It shouldn't be. And so I think, it's out of control, I would say, but yet it I don't see how to stop it. It's like a train, you know.
Do
Now
we have
it's
any agency in this situation? What can we do? Because I do not want to leave our listeners in despair. That is not my goal. I don't want to give anybody nightmares when they're listening to this show. What kind of control do we have as faithful Christian human citizens of our country? What can we do to stop
Well,
the
I think
train?
there are several things. One is that as we can identify products that are provided by corporations that heavily use AI, that we can boycott. This is something we have done before. Now, you know, that might be hard to determine, but with some crusading reporters, we're going to find that out and be able to respond to it. I tend to be an optimist, so I believe that we're at an inflection point in our political system. I think most of us agree that there's a change. Now, I believe by later this year that we're going to uh, take a return to a more democratic system, in which case I think we're going to see that Congress and state houses are going to say, you know what, we're just not going to do business unless we can ensure that those corporations are giving money, are providing support to the workers they lay off or to a commensurate number of workers in relevant fields. So I think that can happen. That there will be many, many people hurt, and that's why that's what I do in higher ed and have been doing for some years, is saying this is coming closer, closer. What can we do? How can we become more efficient without technologies that lay people off, etc.? Now, in fairness, I can say that if we do not tie income to work, if we provide viable methods of income and copious numbers of grants to pursue arts and fine arts and all kinds of fulfilling research, Bible research, and and beyond, that in fact that that's a good point. And now, as I say, I'm approaching a retirement age. I look at it and say, yeah, there are things I can still contribute, but they're not going to give me, that same income. On the other hand, by this point, I should have saved and or have a retirement system. So
Mm.
I think we can look at it akin to people who work part time in retirement, and maybe that's what we turn into, a society that's less of a career oriented and more of a personal fulfillment oriented. Um,
Thank you
with
for saying that, Ray, because I think on the positive side, that's where I'd like to go to with all of this. We need to ask the question, what makes us human? And certainly work is a part of the expression of our humanness. And there are so many other ways. And, we're facing that actually as Catholic sisters right now. There are fewer of us,
Yes.
and we are older than we used to be. Does that mean that we're just put out to pasture and we are worthless? Absolutely not. The wealth of our spiritual experience and the depth of our prayer and the compassion that we have learned in our lives all contributes to the well-being of humanity. We had 52 children from St. Patrick's School here at the Mother House yesterday. They were like ages 5 to 10 or 11 years old. And they were delightful, and they were as thrilled to be with the older sisters in our community as we were to have them there. The joy was palpable. So we need to center in and focus on who we are as human beings. And while we're working to try to make these AI tools as human-centered as possible, we need to strengthen our human relationships and get in touch with one another in real time and real space, and recognize the joy that God calls us to, and I think that's the message that I would like to leave. We need to be attentive to the challenges of the AI tools, and we need to take the cue from people like your friend who is studying human-centered AI, and Pope Leo and others in the Vatican who are saying, protecting human rights and human dignity is at the center of a just society, that we need to understand the divine nature of every human being as followers of Jesus, the Son of God, and that all of that can enrich our lives. Sister 𝐎𝐧𝐞, we don't have enough time to go into a lot about her, but she is fond of saying that AI is a human product that is a part of human evolution. And so the question that we should be asking is, how does AI free us to be more human? And she talks about how much science needs religion and not the other way around these days. So there is a tremendous role in this rapidly changing society for persons of faith who are contemplative and thoughtful. And that's kind of what I'd like to encourage you to think more about. I know your focus is higher education. Maybe you can dedicate a little bit more of your thought to thinking about how do we humanize these tools, and then how do we treat our brothers and sisters in this new world with that ultimate human dignity that the church is so good about proclaiming. So I don't know if that makes any sense to you or not, but that would be my
Absolutely.
little summary there.
Absolutely. To serve God's will using this technology or in spite of this technology. I think either way, I think that's our higher purpose. Um, I certainly agree that it's part of human evolution. And, we've grown beyond, we would hope, but we've not, but we would hope we've grown beyond war and beyond these kind of dysfunctional things that occurred during the evolution of human beings. So let's use it to help us move forward and to diminish uh, the use of weapons and destruction against one another. So I certainly applaud your view, and I'm hopeful that we'll accomplish that.
Ray, thanks so very much. We could keep going. I think you and I enjoy this conversation, but I hope what we've done is have given our listeners something to think about and ponder as they think about their own mission in life. I would imagine many folks who are hearing us are concerned about the loss of their jobs, or if not their own, those of their loved ones and their family, their children and their grandchildren, perhaps. And so I hope, if nothing else, we've given them some food for thought and some way to think about their own role in a rapidly changing world that integrates their faith and gives them some courage to move forward in faith in light of the technological changes that we're facing as a world. So I am so grateful for your presence here today.
I'm always grateful for you. Thank you.
So you've been listening to Flowcast, a production of the Dominican Sisters of Springfield. The flow in Flowcast stands for the life of the world. And the project of Flowcast is to challenge each of us to live as Jesus did for the life of the world. With great thanks for the whole Flowcast team, Brandon Durham, our sound engineer, and Jean Ann Miller, our marketing guru, and myself, Sister Beth Murphy. Thank you, and we'll talk to you next month.